Mr. President, I rise with my good friend from Tennessee to discuss some truly landmark legislation we'll be introducing later today. This is long overdue. It's called the Music Modernization Act, and it will reshape the music licensing landscape to bring it into the 21st century. As a songwriter myself, I have a deep interest in music issues and in ensuring we have a music licensing system that works. Unfortunately, our music licensing laws have not kept pace with the technological change. We have an outdated, antiquated system designed for the era of CD and cassette tape rather than the era of digital streamlining and audio on demand. Most of us rarely think about the complex laws that govern who can listen to what music, when, and who gets paid when we purchase an MP3 or listen to an interactive stream. We pay our money to iTunes or the streaming service without thinking about how that money gets distributed to dozens, even hundreds of actors across the music industry. You have songwriters and publishers and recording artists and record labels. You have agents and broadcasters and streaming services and performing rights organizations. You have multiple copyrights across multiple individuals for the same song. It's a dense, interconnected web of licenses, rights, and legal obligations that all need and should be carefully calibrated. And our current regime is not well calibrated. Far from it. To begin with, the process of ensuring that songwriters are paid when a song they write is downloaded or played on the internet is a complete mess. The problem lies in matching sound recordings to the underlying musical work. That is, to the song performed in the sound recording. When a person downloads or streams a song, there are actually two sets of copyright holders whose interests come into play. First is the recording artist, who owns a copyright in the sound recording. That is, in the recorded version of the song. Often the recording artist will have assigned his or her copyright to a record label. The other relevant copyright holder is the songwriter, the person who actually wrote the music. And in virtually every case, the lyrics that the recording artist performed. The songwriter owns a copyright in the song itself, in the actual words and music. Often the songwriter will have assigned his or her copyright to a music publisher. When a sound recording is reproduced, whether by download, interactive stream, or fixing the song on a CD or other physical object, the recording artist and songwriter or their respective assignees both receive a royalty. The recording artist receives a royalty for the sound recording itself, and the songwriter receives a royalty for the underlying song. These are called mechanical royalties because historically, reproduction of sound recordings was done through mechanical means. Think of a vinyl record and its grooves. There's also a second type of royalty that comes into play when a song is performed publicly, such as on the radio at a concert or over a digital transmission service like Pandora. This type of royalty is called, sensibly enough, a public performance royalty, and just like the mechanical royalties, it is paid to both the recording artist and the songwriter or their assignees. As I said earlier, the problem lies in matching the sound recording to the underlying musical work. That is, in determining who should get paid when an individual downloads a song or listens to an interactive stream. Figuring out the recording artist is pretty easy. When digital music services play music, they play sound recordings. They play a song recorded by Taylor Swift or Jay-Z or Garth Brooks, or they offer the sound recording for download. In either case, determining who recorded the song is straightforward. Figuring out who the songwriter is, however, can be much more complicated. A recording artist may play 10 different songs by 10 different songwriters on a single album, or 10 separate writers may have contributed to a single song, with each entitled to a cut. And unlike with recording artists, it's usually not apparent from the sound recording itself who the songwriter is. Of course, the recording artist or the record label, if the recording artist has assigned his or her rights to a record label, may know who the songwriter is, but not always, and it's simply not feasible for digital music providers to independently track down every individual songwriter for the millions of songs they offer over their services. The problem of unmatched works, that is, works for whom the sound recording has not been matched to the underlying songwriter, creates significant difficulties for both digital music providers and songwriters. Start with digital music providers. By law, these services are required to pay mechanical royalties to songwriters for interactive streams and digital downloads. But if they don't know who the relevant songwriter or publisher is, they can't pay the royalty. This exposes digital music providers to significant liability if the songwriter or publisher later appears and asserts its rights. At the same time, songwriters get short shrift because they don't get paid when they're supposed to be. Streaming services play their songs, and digital platforms offer their songs for download without paying the required royalties. As you can see, this is a complicated system. It's a bad situation all around. That's where the legislation Senator Alexander and I are introducing today comes into play. Our bill, the Music Modernization Act, creates a blanket mechanical license for digital music providers. This license, which will be administered by a mechanical licensing collective, will enable digital music providers to obtain a single mechanical license for the music they play, rather than having to individually seek out songwriters and publishers. Services that obtain the license will receive liability protection. Songwriters and publishers, in turn, will benefit from increased royalty statements. Among the mechanical licensing collective's duties will be establishing and maintaining a public database that identifies musical works and their owners. Now, this will help reduce the number of unmatched works. In addition, the Music Modernization Act provides that royalties for unmatched works will be distributed after a holding period of 3 years to known copyright holders on a market share basis. This means that rather than going unpaid, royalties for unmatched works will go to existing copyright holders, or according to how active each copyright holder is in the marketplace. Our bill also contains a critical update to the rate standard for mechanical royalties for songwriters. Current law requires the Copyright Royalty Board to consider a variety of statutory factors in setting mechanical royalties. These factors, however, do not accurately reflect market demand, with the result that songwriters are paid a below-market rate. Our bill revises this standard to instruct the board to establish rates that reflect what a willing buyer and willing seller would agree to in the marketplace. Lastly, the bill makes 2 changes related to public performance royalties for songwriters. As I explained earlier, this type of royalty comes into play when a song is performed publicly, such as on the radio, at a concert, or over a digital transmission service like Pandora. Public performance royalties for songwriters and publishers are administered through performing rights organizations, or PROs, the most well-known of which are ASCAP and BMI. ASCAP and BMI offer blanket licenses to radio stations, restaurants, digital transmission services, and others that allow licenses to play all songs in the PRO's catalog. These blanket licenses are governed by 2 1940s-era consent decrees that require all rates under the licenses to be set or approved by a federal judge in the Southern District of New York. The Music Modernization Act makes two changes relevant to these consent decrees. First, it says that any judge in the Southern District of New York may hear a rate-setting case involving ASCAP's or BMI's license fees, not just the particular judge who oversees the consent decree. Second, the bill revises current law to allow judges in these rate-setting proceedings to consider evidence of public performance royalties paid for sound recordings in setting public performance royalties for songwriters. The purpose of this provision is to better align public performance royalties for sound recordings with public performance royalties for the underlying musical work, and to ensure that songwriters are properly rewarded when a song they write becomes a hit. Mr. President, as I mentioned earlier, music licensing is an incredibly complicated subject. I've endeavored today to explain the Music Modernization Act in a straightforward way that individuals not steeped in this subject can understand. The key points are as follows. First, the bill will help solve the problem of unmatched works so that digital music providers are protected from liability and songwriters receive the royalties they're due. Second, the bill will better align royalties for songwriters with royalties for recording artists and with market demand. It will also bring much-needed transparency to our music licensing system by creating a public database that identifies musical works and their owners. I'm pleased to report that our bill has broad support across the music industry, which is a tremendous thing. One of the things that makes this legislation such a breakthrough is that we've been able to get the songwriting side of the industry, the songwriters and their representatives in all these matters, in the publishing and PRO community, on board with the recording and distribution side of the industry, the record labels and digital music providers. Indeed, Mr. President, I don't think I've ever seen a music bill that has such broad support across the industry. All sides have a stake in this, and they've come together in support of a common-sense consensus bill that addresses challenges throughout the music industry. Introduction is just the start of the process. Bill's chances as they move through markup and floor consideration, and there are some outstanding issues in the latter part of the bill that remain to be resolved with broadcasters. I'm committed to working through these issues as the bill moves forward so that we have the broadcast or the broadest consensus possible. I said at the outset, Mr. President, that I'm a songwriter myself. I have a deep and abiding interest in these issues. These matters are personal to me. They're also an important part of my legacy. But I'm relatively unknown, and I don't expect to make a lot of money out of the music industry. But I am deeply interested in this and making sure that those who do create these wonderful musical subjects really are treated more fairly than they are today. I fought long and hard for strong copyright protections my entire time in the Senate. I passed a number of landmark copyright bills, from the Copyright Term Extension Act to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to the Family Movie Act. The Music Modernization Act is another in that long line of landmark legislation. In fact, Mr. President, I view it as the capstone of my work on copyright. I say that, Mr. President, because I want my colleagues to know how important this bill is, not just to me, but to my friends. And I want my friends in the industry to know how important this bill is to me as well. I have less than a year left in this body, and one thing that I'm dead set on is enacting this bill into law before I leave. I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting and sponsoring this bill. The music we create in our country is an important part of our culture and of the message we carry to the rest of the world. Let's do everything we can to ensure we have a music licensing system that's fair. That rewards creativity, and that creates the right incentives to write, perform, and sell music. That's exactly what the Music Modernization Act will do.